Leviticus chapter 11. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and said to them, Speak to the people of Israel and say, Of all the animals on the earth, these are the animals you may eat. You may eat any animal that has divided hoofs, divided into two parts, and that chews the cud. You may not eat the following, which either only chew the cud or only have a cloven hoof: the camel, because though it chews the cud, it does not have divided hoofs. It is to be considered unclean. The rabbit, because though it chews the cud, it does not have divided hoofs. It is to be considered unclean. The hare, because though it chews the cud, it does not have divided hoofs. It is to be considered unclean. The pig, because though it has divided hoofs, it does not chew the cud. It is to be considered unclean. You must not eat the meat of such animals, nor touch their dead bodies. They are to be considered unclean. Of all that live in water, you may eat anything that has fins and scales, and lives in sea or river. But anything living in sea or river that does not have both fins and scales, among all the swarming aquatic creatures and all the living creatures found there, you will regard as abominable. Since you regard them as abominable, you must not eat their meat, and their dead bodies you will consider as abominable. Any aquatic creature without fins or scales is to be considered abominable. Among the birds, here are those you must consider abominable and not eat: the eagle, the bearded vulture, the osprey, the kite, the several kinds of buzzards, all kinds of ravens, the ostrich, the screech owl, the seagull, the hawk of any kind, the falcon, the night owl, the eagle owl, the carrion vulture, the ibis, the pelican, the hoopoe, the stork, the several kinds of heron, and the bat are to be considered abominable. All winged insects that move on 4 feet shall be abominable for you. Of all these winged insects, you may eat only the following: those that have legs above their feet, so that they can leap over the ground. These are the ones you may eat from among them: the several kinds of swarm locusts, swallow locusts, swift locusts, and grasshoppers. But all other winged insects that have 4 legs you are to consider abominable. By these you can be rendered unclean. Anyone who touches the dead bodies of one of these animals will be unclean until evening. Anyone who picks up their dead bodies must wash his clothes, but he is unclean until evening. The same with animals that have hoofs, unless their hoofs are divided and they chew the cud, and also for all 4-footed animals which walk on the flat of their feet. Everyone who touches their dead bodies shall be unclean until evening. Anyone who picks up their dead bodies must wash his clothing, but will be unclean until evening. You will regard them as unclean. These are the small animals crawling on the ground that shall be unclean for you: the blind mouse, the rat, and any kind of lizard, the shrew mouse, the bandicoot, the spotted lizard, the chameleon, and the garden lizard. These are to be considered unclean among all the swarming animals. Anyone who touches them when they are dead will be unclean until evening. Anything on which the dead body of any of these creatures falls becomes unclean, whether it is wooden utensil, clothing, leather, or sackcloth, whatever be its use. It must be dipped in water and will remain unclean until evening. Then it will be clean. If the creature falls into a clay pot, the pot must be broken. Whatever the pot contains is rendered unclean. Any food on which water from such a pot has been poured will be unclean. Any drink which may be drunk from such a pot will be unclean. Anything on which the dead body of such a creature may fall will be unclean. If it is an oven or a cooking furnace, it must be broken, for they are unclean, and you must treat them as unclean. A spring or a cistern for collecting water remains clean, but whoever touches the carcass becomes unclean. If one of their dead bodies falls on any seed whatever, the seed will remain clean. But if the seed has been wet, and such a dead body falls on it, then you must consider it unclean. If one of the animals that you use as food dies, then anyone who touches the dead body will be unclean until evening. Anyone who eats the meat of the dead animal must wash his clothing and will be unclean until the evening. And anyone who picks up the dead body has to wash his clothing and will be unclean until evening. All the creatures that swarm on the ground are an abomination and may not be eaten. Everything that crawls on its belly or goes on 4 legs or has many legs, all the creatures that swarm upon the earth may not be eaten, for they are an abomination. Do not make yourselves unclean with any swarming creature that might defile you, for I am the Lord your God. Keep yourselves apart from unclean things and be holy, for I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean with any of the creatures that swarm on the ground, for I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that I might be your God. Be holy, because I am holy. This is the regulation for animals and birds, and for every living creature that moves in the water or that crawls on the ground. Let everyone distinguish between the clean and the unclean, between creatures that may be eaten and creatures that may not be eaten.